I was 22 years old when I came to prison.
I was 30 years old when I went to prison.
I was at the age of 19. I had just turned 19.
Hi, I'm Chris, and I help life-sentenced men transition from institutionalized prison life back into society. Every one of our men has already served 25 to 45 years in prison. I serve on the board of the Corrections Transition Program at Everglades Correctional Institution in Miami, Florida. I teach these men life skills and how to speak, listen, and think, so when they get paroled, they become assets to their communities rather than liabilities of the state. Welcome to Men Going Home. I'm Chris Wolfe, and we've got another great show for you today, because we are the only show that brings you access to a segment of society very few people know anything about. Men who have spent more than 30, 35, and even 40 years in prison. We'll talk to them about their crimes, their life in prison, and what their transition back into the world, into the free world, was like after all those years. Now, before we welcome our special guest, please welcome my good friend and co-host of this show, Andy Korge.
Hey, Chris, how are you today?
Very good. I'm glad you could be here today. Now, Andy, before we introduce our special guest today, what was your take on last week's guest, John Vicente?
It was like a movie, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
His story was unbelievable. And, one of the things that comes back to mind is something you've said to me before. I know you've been involved working with these men for many years at Everglades Correctional Facility, but you've said it just takes one bad decision. And it was one bad decision that set off his course into crime, John's last week. The other thing that really just overcame me was he was given certain signs about getting out of crime that he just didn't seem to quite take. His wife and then his father telling him, you're not welcome in my house. The way you're making money selling drugs is not something that I accept. And so it was sort of a stepping off point for him if he wanted it to be, but it just never was. It was sad. But the whole story was like a movie. I mean, and several people that called me after the show who had watched it commented just that it was like a motion picture, a screenplay.
John Vicente represents and is reflective of so many men that I've met at the Corrections Transition Program. A very nice guy who simply made bad choices and bad decisions. He was an admitted drug dealer for many years, selling 20, 25 kilos of cocaine every month, and he never got caught doing that. But what I thought last week's show demonstrated was that because of the felony murder rule, you don't have to commit a murder to get a life sentence. And somehow John was connected to somebody who did kill somebody, and the prosecution wanted to make the charge stick to him, and he spent 36 years in prison, and he never killed anybody.
36 years, and he was a guy that had so much potential. He was a Major League Baseball contract.
Correct.
out of high school or junior college.
A brilliant entrepreneur.
A brilliant entrepreneur. He got hired in banking, and then that bad decision with Barnett Bank back then sort of set his path to needing money and getting into the drug trade.
As you said, I bet he laid on his bunk many years and said, "Why didn't I play softball for the Barnett Bank softball team?"
Yeah, it's a great story, and certainly anybody that would like to watch it, it's available on YouTube, here on Facebook. Also, podcasts available if you want to listen to the audio content. You can get it on Google Play, on Stitcher, on Apple, on Spotify, all the places you get great podcasts.
Thank you for mentioning that. All right, Let's get this show on the road and introduce today's special guest. Today's special guest went to prison 3 times because of drugs, drug addiction, and many burglaries and robberies to get money to support his drug addiction. He has survived over 40 years in some of the most violent prisons, and he is here today to tell his story. Please welcome our special guest, Darrell Smith. Welcome to the show, Darrell.
Glad to be Mr. Wolfe.
All right. Darrell, question. I was told by another convict in the corrections transition program that your nickname in prison was Cowboy. How did you get that name?
Well, when I was young guy, and like I told you, I was very athletic right over here at Southwest Boys Club on US 1 and 32nd. I started running track for a guy in the neighborhood. And he said, "Hey man, you run bow-legged like a cowboy. I'm gonna start calling you Cowboy."
Cowboy.
So the name stuck with me over the years.
Well, now I'm going to call you Cowboy now that I know
Well,
that story.
Most other people call me that, even Vicente, Danny, everybody.
Darrell, here's a question. You and I met for hours and we discussed your life. You were a great student and a great athlete, football, basketball, baseball, all up until about the age of 15 after your freshman year in school. But then all of that changed. What happened in your life that caused things to kind of go the other way?
Well, from the first through the ninth, I was an excellent student. Only remember missing one day of school from the first to the ninth grade.
Right. You said you had perfect attendance.
Perfect attendance, honor roll, every month.
But you started skipping school at this point. So what was going on in your life?
Well, when I got to Carl Gable Senior High in the 10th grade, I started the skin popping.
Now, wait a minute. Skin popping. What first of all, so you started doing drugs?
I started doing drugs.
Okay. You're 15?
Right.
What drugs were you doing?
I was smoking marijuana, snorting cocaine, and eventually started skin popping.
And is that with heroin?
That was with heroin.
Skin popping. Explain what skin popping.
Skin popping is different from intravenous because intravenous, you're running it through your veins. Skin popping is when you cook it up the same way, but you hitting the back fat portion of your arm, you know, like a shot that they would give you in the clinic somewhere.
Right.
And you would get it in like that, which it wouldn't leave tracks or nothing like that, but you would have it would have the same effect.
The same as intravenous.
The same as intravenous.
All right. Now, before we get more into your drug life, because that did take over your life, let's go back. You had 3 brothers and 2 sisters?
Right.
Did they end up in prison?
Only me and the brother over me and my sister, after I was in prison, when I went in 80, she got caught in Atlanta, Georgia with like 3 pounds of cocaine. So she was trafficking also.
So she went to prison in Georgia for how long?
5 years.
And your brother, he went to prison
in Florida
for drug dealing?
Mostly burglaries, robberies. He didn't sell as much drugs as I did. He was more like a robber, burglar.
Gotcha. Now, your parents were hardworking, law-abiding people, correct? Your mother was she was in a domestic cleaning,
right?
And then she became a clerk at a hospital,
right?
And your father
at a Mercy Hospital. And my father was a city of Coral Gables sanitation worker. You know, clean up the highways. They came from Georgia in '56, trying to make a better life for their kids, because we was from a rural part of Georgia, only farming, and they wanted to come to a city and give themselves and their kids a better life. So they came down, and everything really was going good. But like we talk all the time, the choices that the kids made was come back and hurt us. Gotcha. Even my oldest brother, he was a Vietnam veteran, and he was one of the first black firemen in Miami. Worked for Wells Fargo or one of the other companies. But when he went to Vietnam, he started shooting heroin, and he was like a functioning addict. He didn't commit crimes like us, burglarize and rob places. He would keep a job, but he was using here and there periodically.
Right. So now you're 16 years old. You're skipping school. Forget, your perfect attendance is out the window, right?
Out the window.
Now you're not only using drugs, You're selling drugs and you're only
Right.
16 years old. What are you
Right.
selling?
I'm selling heroin, cocaine, and marijuana,
Quaaludes?
and Quaaludes, raw 16, and all that.
How much money are you making at this point in your life? You're 16 years old selling drugs. How much money are you making?
Well, every day is different, but I've made $20,000 a day. All of it wouldn't be profit because I invest the money to buy it.
Yeah, you had to
But
buy the drugs.
$20,000.
But you said easy come, easy go.
Right.
What were you doing with the money at 16?
I was giving my friends a lot of money. I bought living room sets, refrigerators for my mother.
Mm.
And we had just moved into a house, moved out some apartments because my mother and father separated.
Okay.
And my mother kept the kids, so she was a one parent. She took care of the family with one parent. She was the only parent. So she needed help.
And where was your father?
He stayed in the same town in Coconut Grove,
Okay.
but he stayed alone. And he didn't really come back. What happened was that he started drinking on the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, we were getting bigger. So we was assaulting him really bad.
Because he was drunk?
Right. And no, because he would jump on my mother when he get drunk.
He was getting physically abusive with your
Right.
mother. So
And you're protecting your mother.
protecting
Right.
your mom, you stepped in. And you would
Yeah.
get physical with your father.
Right. And I almost killed him twice. So his sisters and brothers said, hey, you got to break up.
Gotcha.
You know?
All right. So now you're 18. It's 1973. You should have graduated from high school.
Right.
But you said you were so far out into the street,
Right.
you just quit school.
I just quit school. A guy gave me a pound of coke on credit for like $3,000. And I kept flipping it. And I was doing good. But I was doing good on the street, but I was still shooting drugs. By that time, I had them long ago stopped skin popping. And I was intravenously using it at that time. So, but I was making a lot more money than I was using. So I was able to save a little money at the time. And that's when I opened a store, a clothing
Right.
boutique, and bought a
Right.
lot up in Malabar, Florida.
All right. Now, hold on a second. Let's back up a second because you said you had bought furniture for your mother.
Right,
Your parents were law-abiding people.
right,
You dropped out of school. Everybody knows you're selling drugs.
right.
What did your parents say? Were they okay with it?
She knew, but she was poor. She needed help.
Gotcha.
She got
Understand.
4 kids at the house,
Gotcha.
and she's just doing work where she might make $50 a day or whatever. The
Right.
rent, the food, she had bills that she really couldn't take care of herself.
So you're 18 years old and
Right.
you're using heroin.
Heroin,
You're intravenous.
right.
How much heroin were you using? Because you weren't skin popping anymore.
No. So I was shooting maybe 12 $10 bags a day. And I would use 3 for each shot,
That was a lot.
pretty much.
That was a lot.
So I would do like 3-4 shots a day, probably more than that.
Were the physical effects of your addiction starting to show?
No, not at that time because I was 18, 19, still moving around. And I would also gamble, shooting pool,
Right.
$25 a game. And I moved around a lot and I was still physical. I was probably still playing basketball, football, every blue moon. But, you 18 or 19, you're in good shape.
But how much on a daily basis was your heroin habit costing you in 1973? You're only 18 years old.
100, 120, 150, between $100, $150 a day.
Wow. So here's, all right. So now you need $100 a day to support your habit, and you're selling drugs, you're making money, but you're using drugs and you need $100 a day. So you turn to burglary.
Right.
Talk about that.
Well, a dope dealer using his own drugs, he's gonna go down. I mean, eventually it's just a matter of time.
Right.
So when I went down, got broke, lost everything, I turned to crime, burglarizing and robbing hotels and motels and stores. And that's how I supported the habit all the way until 1975 when they caught me and sent me to prison.
Yeah, but they caught you for really 2, which we'll
Right.
talk about. But how many burglaries did you actually get away with?
Hundreds.
Hundreds?
Hundreds?
More than
Between
200?
200 at least. I mean, I was, and even some guys would come and get me because they knew I was pretty good.
Right.
So
You ever
I
hurt
mean-
anybody?
no,
What,
most of the time the people would never see me.
what's the most common mistake the homeowner does that lets you get in the house?
Leave doors open, leave windows open, have faulty locks. Don't close the windows and lock them.
That's the big thing. They leave doors, everything unlocked.
Doors and windows, garage.
You know, you made a very interesting comment the other day. You said your complexion and features
Right,
made it very easy for you to infiltrate neighborhoods.
right.
Talk
And-
about that.
Well, I'm not a jet black African American.
Right.
I'm bright. So I would put my hat on to cover my hair. And that way you couldn't see my hair to say, oh, this a black American guy back in this
They thought you were
neighborhood.
Hispanic?
I could have went for Hispanic, but at that time Hispanics were moving all through Carl Gables, Coconut Grove, and everywhere else.
Right.
So my complexion enabled me to move around in those areas with my hat on.
Gotcha.
And the people may have thought that I was some kind of Spanish or Arab or somebody who lived in that neighborhood.
All right. So 1975, you're 20 years old, 19, 20 years old.
19.
Okay. 200 plus successful burglaries, but you finally get busted.
Right.
What happened?
Well, I had already got busted on one burglary, and I suppose I had turned myself in that Monday morning. They let me out for 1 week. And that Sunday morning, which I was shooting drugs all through the
How
week,
many years did you get sentenced for?
5.
Okay. So they let you out for a week. Go ahead.
And the day before I was supposed to turn myself in on that Monday, I got caught creeping in the guy's house. He was cutting the yard. His wife was washing dishes. The son, the boy and the girl was running around the yard. And I watched them a second. I shot in. The lady saw the back part of my foot go in the bedroom sliding door. So she went and looked and saw her husband still on the lawnmower. And she told him, hey, somebody's in our house. So he jumped out with a double barrel shotgun and made me lay down and had a guy to sit on me until the police came. And
Was that unusual to rob a house that was occupied like that?
No, that's what they call creeping. You know, you see somebody walking around in the house. Because a lot of times I did burglaries and the people had to watch, had the jury and the money with them, you know.
Well, you explained creeping was you were hanging out by the fence line or the bushes.
Right.
And you can see the guy cutting the grass. You see the kids playing in the
Right.
pool. And when you can make a break for the house,
That's
you
what
make
I
a break
did.
for the house.
Right.
So he gets in and out of the house and they don't even know you're in there.
Right. I had went in, got the money and the jury, and was headed back to my bicycle. I had a bicycle. And the guy jumped in the front of me because his wife had told him, hey, there's somebody in here. To this day, I never knew where he got the shotgun from. It must have been in the garage. I don't believe he had it on the lawnmower with him. But
I don't mean this in an admirable way, but that
Mhm.
takes a tremendous amount of courage to go into a house when people are home. I mean, my God, see, I would be afraid I'd get scared. That's why I never do.
Or it takes a bad addiction and really needing money.
Right.
yeah.
There you go.
And when you start doing something, it becomes like second nature. So I had been doing it regularly.
Now, it turns out this guy was best friends with former Miami Mayor Maurice Ferre. And so what happened?
And Maurice Ferre called down to the courthouse and said, don't get this guy less than 15 years, you know, for breaking in my friend's house. And at the time I had a public defender and he found out about it. So he brought it up to the judge. And eventually the judge went on ahead and ran 5 years with that charge, with the other charge that I was supposed to turn myself in for.
Right. So they ran concurrently, not consecutively.
Not consecutively.
So they basically gave you a pass on the other 5 years.
Right.
All right. So now, 1975, 20 years old, you go to prison for the first time.
Right.
You ended up doing 3.5 years of the 5-year sentence.
Right.
What was that first experience like? Where did they send you?
They sent me to Brevard Correctional. That was a youthful offender camp. It was not the type of violence that go on in the other prisons, you know, a lot of stabbings and all of that. It's mostly a lot of fist fights because dudes 17, 18, 19, 21. But they bring older guys from some camp sometime. So I had a lot of fist fights. I got knocked out at least once. I took electronics. I got my GED.
Well, that's
and
good.
I scored one of the highest scores on the map.
Right.
In the GED, or on the GED. And
you got clean?
I was heroin? Clean. No more heroin. I got out in 78 and I was doing interior painting on Miami Beach, painting the insides of the house where I told you across 79th.
Right.
On North Bay Village.
Now hold on. Before you go there, you mentioned that you spent time at Miami-Dade County Jail.
Right.
And you said that's where you beat the addiction, correct? You went through withdrawals.
Right.
All that. Okay.
Right. Throwing up.
And you said that Miami-Dade County Jail, and I quote you, is much more violent than any prison you were ever in.
No, not than any prison, than most prisons.
How so?
Well, because you locked in. The officer not there. Some guys have knives in the cell, real boning knives. And you might go in a cell and it's territorial. Hey man, you not from Liberty City? You not from South Miami? You not from over town? You know, and 5 guys might jump on you, kick your eyes out.
Wow. For
something so silly. And
you mentioned you witnessed the rape of snitches.
Snitches and guys who just looked at sexy to some of the guys who was into that.
So you didn't have to snitch, no.
Yeah, but the snitches, they caught the most hell. You know, they get robbed, they get raped, they get beat.
Gotcha.
And one guy I knew who had told on a guy. They like kept him in the cell for 2 weeks, like running a train on him. You know, the guys who was into that.
Right.
And he finally got out of there. The officer seen him. He was laid in a blanket and officer got him out.
Yeah. 1978, you're out of prison.
Right.
Now, you're using drugs again.
No.
You weren't using
Not
drugs.
At first.
But are you selling drugs?
Eventually. That was the job I had on Miami Beach, painting. But when I get off from work and I go up the street and I see the guys riding in the brand new Cadillacs, selling the drugs and everything. And
that's right.
I'm making maybe $300-400 a week in 1979.
So by 1980, now you're selling drugs again.
Well, no, in 78.
Okay.
But, you know, a little later on, because I got out maybe the middle of the year. But by the time November or December, I was probably selling again back then. And I was making a lot of money because that was the time that I was actually saving because I wasn't using. So I had a pillowcase at my mother's house and a pillowcase at my mother friend's house that I would keep all the $100 bills in. And like I said, I I saved a little, but I gave away a lot.
Right.
My friends,
Easy come, easy go.
right. And I would help different friends and even some that was selling also, but wasn't that good. See, I was kind of creative and I was aggressive on the street selling.
Right.
So I was always able to make more money.
Now, but you mentioned a monumental point in your life, and you called it the beginning of your downfall.
Right.
That you met a woman.
Right.
I quote you. I took a girl from two pimps and fell in love and had a baby with her.
Right.
Why was this your downfall?
Well, in 1978, like I said, when I first started to selling drugs again, I wasn't using. That's how I was able to save the money. But this at the same time that I saw her. Beautiful girl. I mean, physically and facially.
Mm-hmm.
But on the inside, she was a witch. And
Using drugs?
She was snorting.
Okay.
But she was prostituting. She was boosting, like going in stores, stealing stuff out of stores, you know. And she helped me build a business up because I left off the street and I rented a house. And she helped me slowly build up a clientele. But she would be shooting at my customers and everything and running a lot of them away. But like I said, the best thing happened is I had a baby in 1980.
But now this woman, she died in 1988. She was HIV positive.
She was HIV positive.
And you were in prison?
And I was in prison. I went to prison in 80. She died in 88.
All right. Now, in September of 1980, you're involved in a robbery that went awry.
Right.
And you got caught.
Right.
What happened?
I got caught, and the victim, he just put me on the scene because in all reality, he never saw me. But he lied and I lied. But by me admitting that I had went in the house and left before he got there.
Right.
That put me on the scene. So with already passed, you know, well, what really happened, he made it seem like I tried to chop his head off with a machete.
Was there a machete even there?
There was no such thing.
Okay.
And I got 2 90-year sentences running consecutive for that crime. That was
180 years.
I got 180 years.
Okay. Now, but this is the fascinating part, because you told me a story. You had helped a prominent Miami attorney basically get off a cocaine smuggling charge
from Bimini,
because a woman, her name was Isabel. She would buy heroin from you.
Right.
And the state was using her as a state's witness against this guy.
Right.
But I guess now he gets to her.
Right.
And he says, I guess I'm going to pay you money. I'm going to do something if you recant your story.
Right.
And he calls you and says,
make sure she comes to court.
Make sure she comes to court.
And that's what I did. I knew who he was because I had seen him represent one of my friends.
Right.
And other people. And his name was really big.
Right.
So when he called me and told me who he was, I already knew about it because she had told me about the case. It was him and her husband.
Right.
Her husband was also a smuggler. And by her coming to my house to buy heroin, me and her got to be pretty tight. So I don't know how to this day that he got my number, but he called my house and told me to make sure she be there.
Right.
And that's what I did. So when I caught the case in 1980, she went to him and told him, you need to do my friend a favor. The one made sure I come down to court for you. He said, oh, yeah, sure. So.
Well, he sort of owes you at this point because he's got to keep you happy because you know some stuff about him that could get him in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, well, I would have never went that way, but.
No.
But he was a good enough.
Know that.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So, but now so the story, Andy, is that he's ready to represent you pro bono, and he's a fixer. He gets people off. And you and your friend Walter are in jail together.
Walter Merritt.
And you guys decide, you guys come up with a great idea, and you say, what?
He came up with it.
Walter did. What was it?
He said, we're going to represent ourselves, man. We don't need no lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know nothing about law. I didn't. Never opened a law book. So I said, okay, because he was an older guy that I let stay in my house, one of the rooms in my house. I give him a pistol and a few dollars, you know, and he got caught for a robbery, and he was already in jail. So they put me in the same cell, coincidentally.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when he tell me, man, we need to represent ourselves. I don't know if he was jealous that I had a lawyer and a lawyer who was taking my case free. I never know, because he died in prison.
So you didn't, you told this guy, thanks, but
I
no
told the guy, don't worry about coming back. He had already told me, oh, don't worry, I can get you, at the worst, you'll do 3 years.
And how did it work out representing yourself?
I got 180 and he got life.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
And he died in prison. He never did get out.
That's an unbelievable story. Unbelievable story. So now you're back in prison for a second time, doing 180 years, and you're pretty young, but you're at Rayford, which is Union Correctional Institution,
Right.
one of the most violent prisons in the country,
Right.
with 1/3 jurisdiction. That
Right.
means what?
That means that I couldn't get out on 180 years for 60 years. That's 1/3. Unless the judge okayed it. The parole board had no power over that, because the judge withheld jurisdiction for 1/3 of that 180 years.
So even if the parole commission says, we think, the crime didn't fit the sentence didn't fit the crime, the
Right.
judge has final say.
Right. They could not have let me go unless the judge say, okay, I'll let him go. But for 60 years, the judge had the power over my case until my brother got me a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And I got that thrown out, and I got the 290s running concurrent. So I only had 90 years instead of 180.
So you're in prison, and you become a drug dealer in prison.
Right. Some of my friends, they was doing pretty good in South Carolina, Miami, and Atlanta, Georgia. So they was sending me coke and marijuana up there. I wasn't using. Well, I was smoking a little marijuana, but
All right. Now,
Was it hard to get it in?
no. There's a lot of ways to get it in.
but now at some point, okay, I'm going to move through your prison, okay, but now at some point, the parole commission realizes that 180 years for what you did was a bit harsh.
Right.
So you only served 16 years of this sentence, correct?
Right. I could have served less than that, but my behavior was not right. And I went to confinement a few times
For what?
to stretch it out. Fighting, bothering with the women that work in the prison.
Mm-hmm.
Probably got caught with drugs once or twice.
Dirty urine?
No, not then, because they started mostly the dirty urine in 92.
Okay. So now you get out, they
Mhm.
let you out, you're working, you're out.
Right.
But-
I got out in 96, and I was working for Daniel Electric as an electrician and going to school to get my electrical journeyman license. So I was out almost 5 years, and I had one more year to do on my license before I took the test.
Right.
And I bought a joint from the police.
Well, wait a minute, back up. Didn't you say you were driving to your friend's house?
I had already drove over there, and the neighborhood, they had a what they call a sting operation. And I didn't know it. And by me being in prison, I wasn't really aware of how
Right.
these look, how they work.
So you're driving down the street and a guy standing on the corner and he says, "Hey, you want to buy you want to buy a joint?"
Well, I had parked the car and was talking with my friend, and I was walking to the store, me and him, and the guy had it, and he was flashing it like that, and I said, "Man, that stuff ain't no good. Y'all have over there." He said, "No, this good." So I bought a joint.
How much did you pay?
Hmm?
How much did you pay?
How much did he charge me?
Yep,
$5.
$5. And what happened when you gave him the $5?
He grabbed my arm, and I told him, "Hey, man, turn my arm loose. What's wrong with you?" He said, "Man, I'm 5'0". So I tried to scoop him up, lift him up, to throw him somewhere and take off. But he said, he jumped back. He said, "You better look around, man. It's too many of us for you to get away."
Right.
And I looked around, and that was it.
Parole violation.
It was a parole violation.
And how many years did you get for that?
I didn't get no time because it was time served. The judge gave me time served, a little misdemeanor like that. And
But it was a parole violation.
It was a parole violation, and they kept me 20 years.
20 years for one
One joint.
joint. So you had done 16, then you did 20.
Right.
So you did
16, 3.5, 16, and 20.
Over 40 years.
So that's like 39 years and some change.
So by the time you got out, how had prison changed since 1975?
It was full of gangs.
Mhm.
It was gang infested. And the food was bad. The private companies had took over the medical department. You can be dying and needing an operation, but they wouldn't give it to you. People had hernias sticking all out of everywhere. They couldn't get it. They had to sue the state to get the people to get the hernias removed. They had to sue the state to get the hepatitis pills for the people who was catching liver going bad and everything. It was just terrible. It was overcrowded. There were no more vocations. Say like you go to prison and say, "Oh man, I'm gonna take this air condition, electric course, painting course." They had took all that out of prison. It was only warehousing. So a lot had changed.
And it was noticeable from the very beginning.
From the very beginning. It was just nowhere to go, nothing to do. You just sit up all day unless you go out on the yard and exercise or get involved with sports or go to the library, do some law work or read some books.
So after 20 years on this parole violation, you get notified that the parole board wants to send you to the corrections transition program.
Right, in Tampa.
Right.
So I go up to Tampa, July 2019, and I stay up there a year, which is a very, very good program for somebody coming out of prison.
Right.
Because they help you get jobs, and all the training we got with you with
Right.
the speaking programs and Gavel Club and all of that. They also have similar training, to prepare you for interviews. But most of the guys that go up there in Tampa seem to have a pretty successful start coming out of prison, because you come out and you have your license, you have a car, this is what staying there affords you.
What's been your biggest challenge with the transition so far?
Getting insurance, finding real good jobs. Some people don't want ex-convicts.
Right.
And right now, the skills that I learned coming up, that I like painting and decorating, electrical, graphic arts, what I learned in the prison, things change, like the projectors we use, overhead projectors,
Right.
they don't even use them no more.
Right.
We had outdated equipment that we
Correct.
was using.
Just getting up to the technology of the world. It's been tough.
The technology has advanced.
Yeah.
How many times over the last 20 years were you considered for parole?
Between 10 or more.
And why were you always denied?
Well, the first time they was denying you because they said that it was time to get tough on crime, regardless of what you do in the prison. You had two different guys that had abducted little kids, one in Orlando and one in North Florida, that took the girl across the Georgia line, raped and killed her.
Mhm.
Both of them should have been locked up for probation violation, and the judge didn't let them out. The judge let them go. So the public had a big outcry, and that's what caused everybody to get snatched back off the street. It was some people that had got out, and they brought them back into prison. People on work release were brought back in.
Right.
And it was just a no tolerance at that time. So they didn't care how good you did, how good your profile or your jacket looked. They were not letting you out till you do 20, 25 years. Like a lot of guys in there with me had dirty urine, where they reported might have had weed or cocaine or some pills, and they did 25 years. I left a guy in there, Shaq, at Everglades. Shaq going on 27 years
Right.
for shooting dice on the side of a building. The police drove up, caught him with dice.
That was during the 90s when they really got tough on crime in the United States, and they didn't want to parole.
Well, it was mostly in Florida around the late 90s.
Okay.
When the girl got abducted out of Orlando
Gotcha.
shopping center.
Mhm.
And then the old man got a girl in North Florida, and he went and killed her and buried her in Georgia. And the public had a big outcry.
Darrell, Dr. Regina Sharon, who founded the Corrections Transition Program, always stresses to all of the men that it's important to give back to society.
Right.
You're no longer a liability of the state. You're an asset of your community.
Right.
So how, and you've said that service to others is one of the greatest gifts a person can give.
One of the greatest
So
gifts
now
to humanity.
So that now that you're transitioned out and you've been given another chance, how are you giving back?
I gave more back in Tampa because I've been doing a lot of work on my daughter's house. But the old ladies around our house, Jimmy Ayers, who died, him and I, we would cut the yards of the old ladies. Trees have been blown down. We go and chop them up into small pieces and move them. Never accepted any money. One time we accepted $280 for painting the outside and the inside of some people's house.
Gotcha.
But we did yard work for free, trees, cutting trees, drove people around without charging them.
Fantastic.
And that's because Doc said, service to others.
Very good.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the things that we talked about a little bit earlier was that you said the downfall in your life was when you met this woman and you had a child with her.
Right.
But you also said that was a blessing
in disguise.
Now, why don't you tell us a little bit about that blessing? Because where are you living now?
I'm staying with the same daughter that I had from the girl. And she has really turned out to be quite a woman.
How so?
Well, she raised her 3 kids. She got a 4-month-old baby now.
Mm-hmm.
But she raised her 3 kids. The boy is 15. The oldest girl is 23. She graduates next month or 2 from the University of Florida. And the other one, she went to the Rattlers up there.
Okay.
Florida A&M.
Florida A&M.
But
So-
doesn't your daughter, she also has a bachelor's degree?
No,
and
she got a master's.
well, a bachelor's and a master's degree.
Right.
And she's a supervisor at the University of Miami.
Right. She's doing real good, and
And you're living with her and your
Right.
grandchildren.
right.
They call you Pops. You want to give a shout out to them?
Yeah, they give me Pops. Yeah, they call me Pops, Grandpa, and I'm really happy and fortunate to be back there with her because she gave me a room. I got my own bathroom inside it, and coming out of prison, that's like a
gift
step
from
up,
God.
a step up in heaven.
Right.
To have your own bathroom when you're used to sharing, sinks and toilets with 100 people.
I
Right.
bet. Her mother died when she was very young.
Right.
Who raised her?
My mother raised her.
Wow. Well, Darrell, you have been an outstanding guest. You're such a fascinating, interesting story. And I want to thank you for being here today.
Can I ask one question?
Of course. But I just wanted to let Darrell know that we'd like you to come back at some point in time.
Anytime, Mr. Wolf.
All right.
Anytime.
And comments?
Do you think that, as I listen to your story and your plight, do you think that if you had never gotten into drugs when you were 15 years old, your whole life might have changed, been different?
I know it would have, because I would have been a college or NFL football player, or I definitely would have been an accountant, because my mathematical skills, numbers just was automatic to me since I was little. So
Right. One of the things that you mentioned was that you found out when you got your GED that you were actually being considered for a scholarship in mathematics.
For a scholarship in mathematics.
Right.
And even on the GED, I made one of the highest scores in the state.
Right.
So
Right.
that was always.
Thank you for being here today, Andy. You're an amazing co-host, and I thank you.
Well, it's an amazing story, and it personifies to me, Chris, the dangers of drugs, and how maybe getting someone off drugs might be a way not to end up in prison.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's
Before we sign off, I would like to thank John Eddings. He sent me a book on contract parole, which I will read, and I'll get back to you on that, John. And I'd also like to thank Franz and Diana Buckram for sending me a book on Florida prisons and punishment, which I will also read. So thank you for sending me these books. I will read them, and I will get back to you on those. I want to thank you all for tuning in to another episode of Men Going Home. And please join us next week for another great episode. And thank you again for tuning in. Have a great night. Thank you.